Either you're a Christian or you're not. Which one is it?
I could be either of them, but I don't have to tell you.
You don't have to tell me. I was under the impression I was invited to talk to a Christian. Am I not talking to a Christian?
No, you were invited to.
I think everyone should look at the title of the YouTube channel. You're probably in the wrong YouTube video.
You're really quite something, you are.
Aren't I? But you're really quite nothing. Right? You're not a Christian.
Okay, I'm done with him.
Oh, look who just got cucked by God.
But you're really quite nothing. Right? You're not a Christian.
Okay, I'm done with him.
I didn't know you could do that. Oh, I'm done with this one. Next. I ring the bell. I am for who the bell tolls.
Hello there. I'm Dr. Jordan Peterson. I'm a clinical...
Oh, thank God he started with doctor. I'm glad. So everyone knows he's got to establish it, right? And this is going to be a great performance by one of the titans of the intellectual dark web. I still say that I don't think a single intellectual dark web member would be able to do any better than Jordan Peterson here. Because at the end of the day, you've got a collection of people who, some of them have no background or expertise, Dave Rubin, Joe Rogan, mixed in with people who have very, very accredited academic backgrounds, Sam Harris, Jordan Peterson, Brett Weinstein, but they all have very highly specialized fields, right? Like James Lindsay, he's a mathematician. I believe Sam Harris is, he's a neurologist. Like, again, he probably knows more about that field than I ever will, no matter how much I studied. That doesn't mean he should be talking about, you know, social injustices, crime rates, over-policing, the prison industrial complex. None of those. You should be talking about your highly specialized field and maybe just learn when it comes to the rest of those topics instead of pretending like you were an expert on them right from the jump.
Psychologist, a professor emeritus at the University of Toronto, an author, a podcaster, public speaker, and today I'm surrounded by 25 atheists.
25? I thought it was 20. Shit.
My first claim,
5 more.
Atheists reject God, but they don't understand what they're rejecting.
This stuff is so vague. So just for your context, Sam Cedar did this and he played the game. He was like, so how does this work? Okay, you get to pick the question. You can frame the question however you want, and then people have to debate you on it. And then he was like, okay, and then frame the questions in such a way where you are really put in a difficult position to try and defend it, such as the only reason that voting for Donald Trump benefited you is if you are a billionaire, an ethno-nationalist, or a fascist, something like that. And then they have to sit down there and be like, no, Trump benefits me because of X.
Good afternoon, Dr. Peterson.
How are you doing?
So this claim here that atheists don't know what they're rejecting. My background is in studying to become a traditional Catholic priest, daily mass, daily rosary, going on long retreats, deep into the magisterium and biblical hermeneutics, like I was thoroughly in it. And it seems like I do know what I'm missing. Is there something that I missed over years of study, both this issue formally and living out religion so deeply?
Well, you obviously feel that you missed something when you were practicing for the priesthood. Your aim was off then. So there's always the possibility.
I already loved his tone. It's already condescending and like, oh, you're my adversary. Oh, you're not going to get one on me, bucko.
That it's still off now.
What was off about my aim in the first place?
I don't know. That might take a long time to figure out. But
then it seems kind of like this no true Scotsman type of fallacy in which you're the arbiter of people's aims and how they understand those aims to be. How is it that you can claim that people don't know something that you know about their life despite not having met them?
Well, it's obviously a generic claim, just like the atheist claim that there's no God is a generic claim. In your case, it would have to
that you made. It's your question.
be specified more, and I'm not claiming to understand what was going on in your mind, but my experience with atheists is twofold, is that they have a very reductive notion of what constitutes God, let's say in the Judeo-Christian tradition, and they've often been hurt by someone who was religious or by the religious enterprise or perhaps by God himself, so to speak, and that's left them with an animus.
But I think that you have a reductive view of what atheism is. You've defined religion so broadly to include any sort of having aim in life, any sort of cultural archetypes, or having a metaphorical substrate. And atheism to you is a very specific type of like 3 people in the world that are these Raskolnikov type of, they want to get away with a perfect murder. It seems like you have the reductive view of what an atheist is.
Well, let's start with your claim. How do you define the God that you're rejecting? Like, what is God to you? You studied in the church, you found that unsatisfactory. How would you characterize what you rejected?
I think the average Christian believer, when they say that they're Christian and they believe, they mean some sort of God that is all-powerful, all-perfect, is somehow involved in the matters of this world, and that we look to them through wisdom and with the Logos incarnate in Christ. And it also seems like you don't believe in religion in the way that the average Christian says that they believe in religion. And there are as many gods out there as there are believers, because everybody has mutually exclusive and different views of what God is. So it seems
Well,
like...
if everybody had mutually exclusive views of what God is, no one could speak to each other. The mere fact of communication presumes a commonality of assumption and definition. And it's certainly not the case that I regard any archetypal manifestation whatsoever as equally religious. So that's not a real claim.
You just got word salad.
Let me give you an example. For example, there's a sub-narrative in the story of Moses where Moses is rewarded with a glimpse of God. Okay, and that's one of the ways that God is characterized in the Old Testament stories.
Yes.
Now, Moses is a faithful servant of God and a good man. At least that's the case within the confines of the story.
One possible interpretation.
It's the case within the confines of the story, obviously.
Well, not obviously. When we look at the Bible can't precisely say anything because there are so many different...
You see how much difficulty he's having already with very basic pushback? This is the first student, by the way, this is the first atheist, but already just mildly being like, well, not necessarily. I mean, they are open for interpretation after all. This was, written a long time ago.
Exegetical and hermeneutic views of this particular book, and that everybody has everybody has disagreed historically on, it seems like, even the most benign detail about a book this big. And it seems like you can only say that the Bible says something if you first presuppose that it's univocal.
So your claim essentially is that Moses in the Old Testament plays the role of a villain or is irrelevant? Because the alternative claim is that he's good.
I'm saying that we can't know, because we can't talk to those authors.
If you are going to start with the presupposition that there's nothing I can say about any of these stories that you're not going to disagree with from the perspective that there are multiple potential competing claims, then I can't speak with you. So
and we also have a short time here, so I want to get to the core of...
Well, yeah, because it doesn't agree with your worldview. I can't even have a conversation with you if you're not willing to agree with everything I say on the surface. Oh, okay. I'm just saying what I believe to be something that wouldn't be that controversial, which is that we can't necessarily know since the authors of the text aren't alive today.
What you're arguing here, and I'd love if we could...
The core of what I'm arguing is that atheists reject God, but they don't understand what they're rejecting. So I'm trying to give you an example of what's being rejected and its complexity. Okay, so God rewards Moses with a glimpse of the divine. So this is a definition of the God that atheists are hypothetically rejecting.
A possible one.
I said I didn't say the. I said
This is the first one. He's already getting so mad. Oh, man.
Right. It's possible, yes.
He must have been such a shitty teacher. You can just tell he's one of those dick teachers where you're just like, I don't know if that makes sense, sir. We don't have any actual demonstrable proof that what you're showing on screen right now is actually DNA. You see two serpents intertwined, and you're saying this was the first discovery of DNA when, again, it could just be two serpents' tails wrapped around each other. Oh, bloody hell. You have no idea what the hell you're talking about. Get the hell out.
Okay. So despite the fact that Moses is a stellar character and he's had a long and difficult life and can withstand a lot of difficulty and travail, God puts him between two cliffs. So he can just see a crack of what's in front of him. And when God walks by, he allows him to see his back. Okay, so the implication of that story
I believe that.
is that the divine is fundamentally unknowable. It's a pinnacle experience, and that people in their finitude have to be shielded from a comprehensive vision.
Right there, you could have jumped on that, where you just said it's fundamentally unknowable. That's the entire premise of your argument here, right? Atheists reject God, but they don't understand what they're rejecting.
Of the basis of reality. Well, that's not the God that's defined in that manner, right? It's not a simple personification. It's not a simple old man in the sky. It's something that in its essence is unknowable and overwhelming. And that isn't in my experience, the God that's defined by atheists who are attempting to
Your personal
undermine the story.
experience.
I mean, it's the same claim, for example, that you're a finite creature and that you face something that in the final analysis is unknowable, and that you have to establish a relationship with it
Never thought of myself
regardless
as
of
that,
your
but I guess, yes,
inability
I am a
to
finite
perceive
creature.
or even withstand perceiving the whole. Okay, is there a problem with that?
I mean, the problem is that when we look at, famously, when you've been asked, do you believe in God? The question becomes, what do we mean by God? And in the Bible, it's not even clear the biblical authors know what God is, because Yahweh has historically emerged from an early storm god, a deity that doesn't exhaust the category of deity, and that has changed over the Old Testament. Does God have physicality? Does God not have physicality? It seems like, yes, if you define religion to mean anybody that has an aim, anybody that looks at the unknown, anybody who wants to go from chaos to order is inherently religious, then yes. But also in the same way, I could define atheist as somebody who doesn't dogmatically believe in a religion, or somebody who doesn't regularly attend religious services or belong to a denomination. Help, especially the audience, kind of like boil this down. There was a lot of words there. That the central claim is that we exist somewhere between the finite and the infinite.
A central claim.
A central claim is that we exist somewhere between the finite and the infinite.
No,
Is that-
I said that we were finite and we had to establish a relationship with the infinite.
Yeah, then in that case, then we're all religious, but then I can do the same thing and define one particular element of atheism. It seems like we both have a reductive view of what the other side looks like, to the point where a conversation seems incoherent, and not just incoherent, but not in the way that the average Christian understands Christianity to be.
Do you have a
Okay,
problem
let's
with...
pause there. Sorry, you've been voted out by
Awesome.
the majority.
Hey, how's it going? Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, too.
David.
Chaotic
Good to see
format.
Tell me everything that you know about the Polynesian deity Lono, L-O-N-O.
I don't know anything about the Polynesian deity Lono.
So
Whoa,
you're rejecting
bodied.
something without knowledge of what you're rejecting.
I'm not rejecting it.
Do
No
you
more
be-
than I'm
do you
rejecting
believe in
anything that
Lono?
I don't know anything
Do you
about.
believe in Lono?
I
Do you
fail to
believe
see
that
the
he is a
relevance of
deity
that.
that exists in the world, exists in the universe, that exists in the existence of everything? Do you believe that Lono
I'll
is
answer
a
that
being?
question once you answer my question, which is, do I reject everything that I'm ignorant of? Because that's your presupposition that undergirds your argument, and unless you can prove that that's valid, then there's no point in...
My question is quite simple.
That
Yeah,
was an
but that
argument.
doesn't mean
it's
I'll give
formulated
Jordan that.
accurately.
He
Do you
phrased an
believe
argument with
That
words.
Lono exists, yes or no?
I'm not going to answer that question for the reasons I just described. You already insisted that if I reject something, that if I'm ignorant of something, I reject it. Do you think that
Yeah, he basically tried to get him in a trap there, and unfortunately, Jordan was too astute for this one.
everyone in the world has to know everything simultaneously for that to be valid and true?
I think in order for your
Answer that
argument
question.
to be true, in order for it to be true that we atheists don't understand what we're rejecting, then you need to also apply that to yourself and to Christians and to Muslims and to any other person on this earth, where if you don't understand what you're rejecting the belief in, then you can't reject the belief in it. That's the implication of your
I
claim.
didn't say that I rejected the belief in Lona. I said
it's
I didn't
Lono.
know who Lono was.
I am now pro
Didn't say anything
Lono.
about rejecting.
That's
it.
because I've
believe
asked
in
you several
Lono.
times and you haven't. But let me get to my even greater point. You're saying atheists don't understand what religion is or what God is in order to be able to reject it fully or completely. We have someone over here who studied it in their own way. I've studied religion. I have a degree in religious studies, specialty in Christianity and Mediterranean traditions. And further than that, beyond me, Pew Research studies.
Just so anyone's curious, so you have some context here, because I also don't know about Lono. In Hawaiian religion, the god Lono is associated with fertility, agriculture, rainfall, music, and peace. In one of the many Hawaiian stories of Lono, he's a fertility and music god who descended to Earth on a rainbow to marry Laka. This is amazing. In agriculture and planting traditions, Lono was identified with rain and food plants. He was one of the four gods, with Ku, Kane, and Kane's twin brother, Kanaloa, who existed before the world was created. Lono was also the god of peace. In his honor, the great annual festival of Makahiki was held during this period from October through February. War and unnecessary work was kapu, or taboo. In Hawaiian weather terminology, the winter kona storms that bring rain to leeward areas are associated with Lono as well. We've learned.
Suggests that atheists and agnostics actually
Yeah,
know
Lono
more
seems pretty chill, all
about
things considered.
religion and about religious stories, the foundation
They're chiller than Yahweh.
than believers.
That's because they're more religious than they think they are.
Okay, you can.
They're concerned with deep matters, and one of the defining characteristics of someone who's oriented in a religious direction is that they're concerned with deep matters.
Okay.
In fact, it's virtually definitional.
Right, but they also have to identify with a religious tradition and accept the foundational stories that go along
Well,
with
that would mean more that they're sectarian than that they're religious. And most people, for example, in the United States, deny that they're religious but accept that they're spiritual.
Let's pause there. You've been voted out by the majority.
So anyone who doesn't understand how the show works, effectively, whoever runs to the chair first gets to debate the question that the host picks, and then all the other people watching, if they're enjoying what they're doing in terms of debating the person, they just sit back and watch. But if they're thinking, you're failing, then they start to raise their flags. And then once the majority has the flags raised, someone else comes in.
Aha! Hi, nice to meet you.
How are you doing?
Good, how
What's
are you?
your name?
I'm Greg, nice to meet
Hi,
you.
Greg.
Okay, so I feel like you're getting at this idea of polysemy, where we have multiple related meanings for a word, right? Like, for example, a famous painting can be emotionally moving in that it changes my emotional state. And when I was on the highway coming here to the studio, I was physically moving, I was changing my position. If I said, I believe the Mona Lisa is very moving, and you said, you don't really understand what you're saying, it's nailed to the wall, I would say that you're the one who doesn't understand what I'm saying, not the other way around. And the way that relates to this is there are many concepts of God, and I'll admit, I find a lot of what you say about that interesting. I'm familiar with it. The idea of this kind of Jungian hierarchical thing, or as a metaphor or a symbol, or the kind of, atheist, materialist, literalist idea of a agentic, omnipotent, omniscient being that intervenes in reality, right? So when I'm saying that I reject the concept of God, I'm aware of these other definitions of God, but I think that when we use words, we tend to only imply one meaning at a time. So the same way that I would say the Mona Lisa is moving emotionally, but I would not say it's moving physically. I would say I reject the concept of God in this very literal way. But
What literal way?
the way that God is this omniscient, omnipotent, agentic, supernatural being that sent his son down and has, caused miracles and all these things like that. The idea of God is
Do you think that there's an underlying unity of things?
Could you explain that question?
So I guess you're not going to address any of the points he was making, which were pretty well articulated. But we're going to go into a completely different direction now.
Well, scientists, for example, believe that science unifies in a comprehensive theory. Do you, yes, no, or that
know
there are
that
multiple competing truths? Those are the options. Either things unify or there are multiple competing truths.
I think that, I know that, for example, like in physics, people are looking for like a theory of everything.
And why do you think they're doing that?
It's interesting, it's helpful.
But they also believe that there's an underlying unity to things.
In a sense, yeah, like like the material world and time and space are probably governed by universal laws and principles?
Partly that, yes, yes, but that the same thing might extend to a broader domain that would include imagination and value.
Could you help me connect that to the prompt?
Well, I'm trying to define God, the God that I don't think atheists do a very good job of defining. Here's another question for you. What do you think?
That was kind of just a low key, I don't think you're addressing your own question, and I'm trying to. No, I need to know, what do you think God truly thinks and believes?
Guides you in your determination of whether or not what you're saying to me is true.
Can we go back, can we stay on what we were talking about?
We are.
Okay.
You're just uncomfortable with the question.
Oh,
No, I feel
shit.
like you're just kind of throwing different spaghetti at the wall.
I'm not.
Okay.
I asked
All
you a
right.
very specific question.
I don't even
What
like
is
spaghetti,
it that
bucko.
guides you when you're talking to me to help you determine whether what you say is true?
Logic, memory, reasoning, sensory information.
How do you distinguish that from being governed by something that's false?
An interesting question.
How do you know the difference when you speak between what's true and what's false? So you could
I
imagine
infer, right? I can infer, I can...
from what principles?
Please don't say the
So
Bible,
and
Jordan.
What are you getting at?
I'm getting at the fact that your conscience guides you. Is that reasonable?
Conscious is defined by
Conscience.
my empathy and my reason, or my foundational.
Define it any way you want.
Okay, so that's how I'm defining my conscience. Is my my conscience is my sense of
Right
and wrong. Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah,
Where
yeah.
does that come from?
I would say that comes from an evolved capacity to empathize and a recognition of the benefits of engaging with and nurturing that capacity. And then that empathy is constrained and guided by reason, right? Like, for example, I am driving down the highway, there's a kitten in the road. I'm going to empathetically feel, oh my God, I want to save the kitten, but then reasonably, like, I'm going to get hit by a car, right? So that's sort of the process through which I make ethical decisions.
Okay,
Is
how do
empathy
you-
constrained by reason?
Do you think that people can differ in their response to something empathically?
Yeah. Like,
Is there a mediating principle that can tell you one person who's empathic and another person who's empathic that disagree, who's correct?
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think that's where we'd have to, talk it out, right? We do that in real life all the time when we have, whether that's a discussion with a friend about the right thing to do in a situation, whether that's a policy discussion about law, right? That's where we can converse with each other, think about things, explain our perspectives, and then kind of reach a
I'm
conclusion.
gonna be honest. I think this person on the right is being so good faith and patient that it's not working in his favor against Jordan Peterson, who's obviously trying to derail this. Like, he's looking for moral objectivity, right? That's what he's getting at. That's the core of where he's trying to lead this. And I think it was more interesting when he was like, can we just stick to your actual question, because I'm trying to actually figure out how you can define that properly. But I guess this is what people, when they talk about how, like, we just need to have conversations, this would be the ideal scenario for them, which is that you have a right-winger who's got a very strong claim, that he's making publicly, and then someone on the other side trying to respectfully reason with them, but actually be attentive. Like, that's kind of the entire point of good faith, is that, I am willing to take in information and learn new things, and I'm not just here to own you or set up a trap to try and trap you with or get a gotcha.
Right? I think that we do that all the the time.
So
But
Elijah,
yeah, it makes
the
him
prophet
effectively
Elijah defined
not
God in the Old
any
Testament as the voice
use
of
in
conscience
getting
within.
rid of
Okay.
That's
Jordan
a
Peterson's like
definition.
word
So
salad.
you're saying
It was spaghetti,
by
he
that
was right.
definition of God. I see. This is kind of goes back to what I'm saying initially.
I'm
where,
not defining it. Elijah
Okay,
defined
so
it.
as Elijah defines
It's
God.
defined that way in Jonah, too.
Okay, so as
Cardinal
Epic.
Newman also
got
defined
it.
it that way.
As I'm sure you know many people who defined it that way. And it's impressive. You're a very knowledgeable person.
I'm not trying to be impressive. I'm
okay.
just pointing out to you how God is defined in the Old Testament.
All right. So to respond to that, I do think there are lots of interesting ways to define God. And that goes back to my kind of opening
Then how do we
statement.
specify what we're arguing about?
We use context clues, or again, it goes back to my example of the
I'm
Mona
defining
Lisa.
God as conscience.
Okay. So that's interesting, but then you're kind of expanding the
So wait, are we all God? Fucking awesome. Hell yeah. I mean, I think, therefore I am. I've got some conscience, and I'm having ideas and thoughts right now. Yeah, I am God.
meaning of
No,
God.
I'm not. That's how it's defined in the Old Testament.
Okay,
in
so-
Elijah and in Jonah.
Sure. So whoever. So
It's
some.
not whoever.
Okay.
Elijah is one of the
Okay,
major
all right,
Old Testament
all right,
prophets.
all
Right?
right.
He's equal in stature to
Can-
Moses.
okay,
Right. So it's not arbitrary.
All right. So
Yeah, I'd be
that,
lifting my flag at this point.
Is interesting, but it's not relevant to the context with which I am using the term God.
It's directly relevant. Atheists reject God, but they don't
Right, but
understand
you-
what they're rejecting.
you're
You
being-
accept
It's my
conscience
question.
as a guide, and conscience is
think-
one of the defining characteristics of
I
God in the Old
I
Testament.
think you're being intellectually disingenuous.
In what way?
Because
I asked you if you
You
believe that
did
conscience
not like that.
guided
you just
you.
asked me a question and then you stopped me from answering it. In this setting, you understand
True.
the way I am using the term God and belief.
Not
and
in
then
the
you're-
least. I don't understand how you're using it
Didn't even
in
let him
the
finish the
least.
sentence
That's why I'm
there.
trying to define it. My
No.
definition of God as conscience is a lot more precise and oriented than your definition of the God that you hypothetically.
What are you talking about? It's the most vague thing I've ever heard in my life. God is conscious. Okay. Sorry, my consciousness, the idea of consciousness, those who have consciousness, collective consciousness, how does that form the basis for morality? Just simply being aware?
But
disbelieve in.
it's irrelevant to the fault lines of this debate.
How is it irrelevant?
Because in common parlance, when we're talking about atheists, God, belief, not belief,
I
we're
don't
not
care
talking.
about common parlance. I'm trying to get to something fundamental.
I think your point is irrelevant to the way that people tend
Which
to use
point?
these words. Your point that there are these polysemous
I didn't make
ideas
that
of God.
point. You did.
I did. Well, I made,
I made a
I
specific
characterized
point
it,
that God
right.
was associated with conscience.
I just feel like you kind of retreat into this semantic fog.
I'm not retreating at all. I'm advancing, sir. You are retreating.
Well, it was very nice to meet you. I appreciate the conversation.
Yeah, it's very brave of you to do this.
Thank you.
It's very brave of you to do this. Oh, to face off against an intellectual titan like myself, it takes a lot of courage, bucko. Well done.
My next claim is that
All right.
morality and purpose cannot be found within science.
Got it. I feel like we're going back to the, edgy atheist days. I don't know if any of you were voracious readers of the Christopher Hitchens and the Richard Dawkins and the Sam Harrises and the Daniel Dennett's back in the day, but a lot of the same argumentation is going to be coming forward. And I think one of the reasons why that entire scene became so popular with people who were, maybe in grade 12 of high school or getting into their first year of college or whatever that may be, is because it's something that has so much of society claiming to be an authority on, right? Like every single person who's in a religious institution claims that they actually have a moral authority on things that are well beyond the knowable. And so if you suddenly have a series of academic writers who are coming forward to be like, there is no God, and that's why religion poisons everything. Suddenly you're gonna have a ton of young students just being like, oh my God, yeah, I love this shit.
What is up, Mr. Canada?
How you doing, man?
Mr. Canada.
Brian, I think it's interesting that you say that morality and purpose can't be found in science. Actually,
No, within science.
sure,
Yeah.
sure. Purpose, I actually grant you, because purpose is subjective.
The entire movement died quickly. Well, yeah, because so much of it was just based on Islamophobia. Well, like a lot of them purport in their books, because I've read their books. I've read all the major atheist writers, and a lot of them talk about how religion poisons everything. We're going to be covering all religions. There was certainly a lot more time, I would say, dedicated towards two central religions. Obviously, of the big three, it would make sense, but a lot of it usually frames around the fact that at its core, Sam Harris and Richard Dawkins both believe there's something within the texts of the Quran that is uniquely radicalizing, and simply because at the time, being part of the imperial core, they are seeing stories, this is a little bit pre 9/11 and then post 9/11, where all of a sudden they're thinking like, well, yeah, radical Islamic jihad is the biggest threat to Western civilization, and so we have to stop it, because as soon as one of those people gets a nuke, they're going to destroy the entire planet, and they're getting radicalized by the words in the text. And that was obviously used by a lot of the right-wingers in the West to propagate this idea. That's where you get, Ben Shapiro making a video, the myth of the radical Muslim minority, how the majority of Muslims, according to a Pew Research poll, actually do want to, put in Sharia law in the West, and they want to destroy Western civilization, and there's no such thing as peaceful ones. And it took someone like Ben fucking Affleck to cut through that. Like one of those weird moments in history on Politically Incorrect, where you've got Ben Affleck sitting across from him and being like, I think this is racism. I think you're just a racist. Yeah, Sam, you're a racist. And Bill, you're a racist too. Both of you. Yeah. And then they'd be like, no, Islam is not a race, it's a religion. Haha. So no, we're against religion. Doesn't matter who's embodied it. Right, but you seem to be primarily targeting countries and individuals who are Muslim, right? You're targeting Arab countries, you're targeting Muslim countries. It seems like you are putting out there that there's something about the way that they are interpreting a religious text that is making them uniquely violent, and that has something to do with that specific text, which again is going to probably target a vast majority of people in countries that are enemies of the United States, or the United States wants to oppress or destabilize or do a coup or do a military intervention within. That kind of seems like the point.
Right? Unless you want to boil it down to the purpose of life is just to procreate, right? Sure, whatever.
Anyone got a link? Yeah, if you look up Politically Incorrect Ben Affleck, Sam Harris, you'll find it. And it's honestly like 6 or 7 minutes of Bill and Sam doing the thing that they'd always done, which is continuously just be like, and that's why we have to stop people who are Islamic fundamentalists, and we have to stop every single person who's radicalized by these incredibly dangerous texts and all this kind of stuff. And yeah, of all people, it was Ben Affleck who was on the panel. It was, but that makes no sense. He's like, there's like 1 billion people in the world who are Muslim. If they all wanted to be extremists who attack the West, we'd be fucked. He's like, it's just not true. He's like, the majority of them are not trying to just attack Americans or Westerners by virtue of the fact that they hate our civilization. That's just racist. He's like, you're just being racist. That's all this is.
Morality is actually something that we do see. We actually have examples of Neanderthals, an older individual was found in a tribe, missing an arm, missing teeth, still alive somehow in his 40s, 50s, right? Typically, you're a Neanderthal, you can't eat, you can't hunt, you die, right? But we know that members of his tribe were taking care of him, right? So we know that at some level, early in our evolutionary history, we actually developed altruism. We have examples of chimpanzees who actually have a basic understanding of fairness, right? If you give a chimpanzee 2 grapes, right, and his buddy gets 3,
No, what
right?
about
He actually freaks
lobsters?
out, right? But you give both chimps 3 grapes and they're good. We have examples of parrots.
Except for the greedy chimps.
Except for the greedy chimps.
They want 4 grapes.
They want 4 grapes.
Got 'em.
Those do exist, right? But we have similar examples where we do animal tests, right? And
He's right.
So morality is intrinsic.
I think
Empathy
So it
is.
precedes science.
I think that actually
right?
a better way to define it would be that
He's trying to state that it also precedes humanity, right? If you can see and it's demonstrable with a number of other animals that they demonstrate what we characterize as morality, then certainly that is coming from somewhere other than a divine godly soul, telling one group of animals to have empathy for others, right? Have you ever seen, like, I don't know if they're always true, but you'll see like a lot of video compilations on TikTok of animals demonstrating empathy towards one another that obviously they're just used to make you be like, oh, they're so wholesome. I didn't know they do that kind of thing. And they, like, how they'll show solidarity with one another. Dogs will take care sometimes of other dogs, but they can also, by the way, just please make no mistake, animals can also be absolutely vicious and brutal and destructive to one another. This is kind of the point, though, is that, like, you could use any one of those as an example of, okay, well, yeah, we can obviously say that, like, there are no souls in animals below humans because of the way that they demonstrate themselves to be very, very violent and genocidal, and they sexually assault one another, and then they can be absolutely brutal. Some of them will eat their young. All this kind of stuff is stuff that obviously is not befitting, but human beings are divine, and we are obviously a highly superior separate species that actually has the ability to, create things like tools. And then you can just respond with, well, actually, other animals demonstrate the ability to develop tools as well, like chimpanzees, for example.
animals, which we are, right,
Yeah.
require some level of morality or...
Into what? I'm not disagreeing.
Sure.
Why do they require that?
Because it's the only way that social groups can actually survive, right?
That's my point with
Sure.
regards to science. Thank you very much.
Is that
Precisely the point that you just made, that science has to exist within a moral framework that isn't in itself scientific.
how's that not scientific?
Well, because it's not derived from the scientific process, as you just
It
indicated
doesn't
by
need to derive
pointing
from the
to
scientific process.
Well,
It's
hang
the
on,
fact that
hang on a second.
we are social animals, so we need...
Yeah, and also the scientific process is meant to observe so that we can better understand the phenomena of the natural world around us.
that to exist as a group.
I
right?
agree, but
Sure.
you pointed to the morality of Neanderthals, to the morality of chimpanzees. They didn't derive that from science.
They don't need to. That's not how
That's
that works.
my point.
Science explains it. So
No, science doesn't explain morality.
it doesn't explain how social animals would need to be...
Well, that's
altruistic.
a complicated question.
Is it? But we see it, though.
Yeah, but explaining the evolution of morality and explaining morality itself aren't the same thing.
Okay, so you're asking why does this happen?
Yes, that's more accurate.
Because we're social animals and we
Yeah,
need
but there's
to be...
more to it than that.
Is there?
Sure. For example, so we're moral animals that have a sense of the future.
Sure.
Okay, that makes us unique, and that structures our morality.
No, actually, there are other animals that can predict the future. Or not,
Not
predict
really.
the future. No, tigers. Actually, there was a tiger at the SF Zoo that killed somebody. And
Dolphins?
so
Hunting
actually...
animals.
No. Kids threw shit at the tiger. The tiger actually plotted its escape.
By the way,
And it found-
predict the future, obviously not. No animal has the ability to do that with perfect precision. But to have a sense of, let's just say, foresight. That there's other animals that have demonstrated that they can also that to understand something is an investment for something else that they will achieve in the future.
The
I'm not
kids.
saying that animals can't think.
Okay.
No, but
let's
they can
pause
perceive
here.
the future. That's what I'm saying.
Well-
Voted out by the majority.
Thank
Yes.
you, man.
Good
Plenty.
man. Yeah.
Consider the lobster.
Hey, Dr. Peterson. How you
How
doing?
you doing, man?
My name's Luke. Nice to meet
Good
you.
to see you, Luke.
So your claim that morality and purpose can only be found in science is a little
Cannot
shaky
be
because
found.
I think that your claim is really being framed to be morality and purpose can only be found in religion. Is that how you're kind of framing it?
I would say that the domain of religion is the domain of morality and purpose. Yes,
Okay.
exactly. And also that science is actually structured, at least in part,
By the way, remembering all the old atheist arguments for all these kind of things from back in the day, one of the quickest things that would have been a response to any of this is that
clean up your room.
if you think that morality can only be derived from religion, such as the Bible, then what does that say about you? That you're unable to do things that you would agree with me are abhorrent, such as sexual assault, pedophilia, stuff like that, that the only thing preventing you from doing those things is an old text from thousands of years ago. Because that's basically where we find ourselves. That's the inevitable end of this road if you're saying that only morality can be derived from, say, religious text.
Technically, to eliminate such considerations from its purview a priori.
Okay.
Right? That's why we define science as value-free. But that has to be wrong because scientists have to prioritize
Yes, the text does support
their
all those things.
attention
It's true.
towards something before they can even engage in
But it has one
observation.
commandment that says,
And
"Thou
that
shalt not kill."
act of
So
prioritization of attention is a value predicated
that's morality.
act.
It says it.
And so I can continue. There's all sorts of things we have to assume about science before it can take place.
Okay, so what I'm specifically pointing out here is about religion in particular, since you yourself are a Christian, right?
That's, people debate about that, and I generally don't discuss it publicly.
Okay, I understand.
That's such a weird thing to be shy about. Religion is such a prominent part of all of his literature and writing and discussions and sermons and fucking Jesus Christ. No, I'd rather not say. Oh, I want to keep those cards close to the chest, you know?
And me, myself, I am a former young earth creationist fundamentalist.
Oh, yeah.
So I have experience in this. I used to run a TikTok channel directed about apologetics about the Bible, specifically in this type of facet with morality, evolution and such, and going back and forth with that. So in the Bible, it talks a lot about slavery, right?
Yes.
Yes. So in that, it teaches you how to take care of a slave. Rather than saying slavery is wrong, I think
No,
it
it
should
says
say
that in the story of Moses.
It says slavery is incorrect. It says
Well,
it's immoral.
that's why Moses leads his people away from slavery.
So you're inferring it. Right. Although it is strange that it's actually one of the commandments that actually stipulates regulations for what you should not covet. And one of those things happens to be the manservant. So you shouldn't covet your neighbor's manservant. As in, you shouldn't be jealous of your neighbor's slave, because your neighbor's slave is better than your slave. So don't do that. No, it's one of them. One of the two sets of the Ten Commandments are actually different in separate parts of the Bible, which is also weird. But either way, apparently the most solidified rules for how one should conduct themselves, the most important things are jealousy-based. The top three, right? Don't covet other gods, no engraven images, that kind of stuff. So very jealous. So don't do things that make other gods seem better than me. And then once you're done that, don't kill people. Don't rape is not one of them. Also strange, not to have that as one of the fundamental commandments that you should do. Don't harm children isn't one of them either. Again, strange, bizarre. But yeah, there is rules and regulations for not being jealous of your neighbor's slave.
But why does the Bible predicate and tell people exactly how to take care of a slave? Isn't
Well,
that immoral? Wouldn't you say that culturally we've evolved as a species, as he said earlier about empathy?
Yeah, I would say that the reason we evolved, so to speak, away from slavery was because the West was founded on Judeo-Christian morality and the presumption that every person was made in the image of God. So slavery itself became immoral, and that was established by Protestant Christians in the UK, who then convinced the UK government for 200 years to go to war on slavery.
And wouldn't you say that this is about the cultural evolution of humans in general, rather than just Christianity?
No, I think it's the flowering of the ideas that were embedded in the biblical text across long spans of time.
I feel like this is just humans editing based on the cultural evolution of morality.
What do you mean by just?
Just?
Yeah, just humans.
Well, humans.
Editing.
Well, based on culture and history, right? We
what do you mean by
They did do it based on culture and history, but
Yes.
culture and history have their foundations too. So
Well, yeah, but we're talking about slavery. So many people bolstered it based on the
everyone
Bible. Based on the Bible. They looked at it and they justified it in the United States.
Not what is he saying? There'd be a very clear moment where we could just be like, there was actual, plantation owners that quoted the Bible as a justification for the brutality of what they were doing to black people. Like that's, yes, absolutely, that is true. I'm not saying that that book particularly will predispose you towards becoming a slave owner. That would be a very different claim. That's like the kind of claims that, you know, all the hardcore new atheists make about the Quran. But he is saying a complete factual statement, which is that within the Bible, that there's quite a bit of rules and regulations for how one should treat their slaves. And as a result of that, slave owners would use biblical quotes to justify, again, the things that they were doing to other human beings.
The Deep South, they justified slavery.
Yeah, but
based
the main
on the Bible.
thrust, the main thrust of Protestant thought in particular was stringently
Yes,
against slavery,
which-
and it was about the only movement in the history
Yes.
of the human race that
Yes.
had an anti-slavery direction.
Which was driven by humans and their
That's
understanding
one
of
way of
morality.
looking at it. Well, it depends.
It's the same with women's suffrage. I mean, women's in the patriarchy.
What do you mean it was driven by humans? Humans
Humans.
drove slavery too.
Yes, exactly.
So there's no argument there. If slavery and anti-slavery were both driven by humans, what does your claim that they were driven by humans have to do with it?
evolving morality based on the culture that within the society that they live in.
Okay,
So
fine.
with
I think
women's
that did
suffrage as
happen.
well is a very similar topic in the Bible. There are denominations in Christianity, such as Pentecostal movement, which do bolster women to be pastors, right? Which I think that's a great thing to do. But most like to disregard
Where do you
women.
think the idea that human beings were sufficiently equal to all vote and not be slaves came from?
Humans.
Yeah, but so did the idea of slavery.
So did the
that's
idea of God.
Fine, but what's
Yes.
your point? Like, you're not making an argument. You're just saying all thoughts come from humans, regardless of the thoughts.
It's not driven by a higher power. It's driven on our experiences
Define
as
higher.
humans, which is what is best for all people.
Is it driven by conscience?
It could be. Which conscience
Define
is also
could.
something that has evolved
Define
over time.
be.
And I think that's
What's
something
the
that does evolve in morality and empathy.
Okay, I don't understand the point that you're making.
My point is that
You already
God
agreed to it, it's fine.
influenced slavery. People looked at the
You gotta
Bible
win.
and went, "This is moral because God says." it,"
Joshua
just like
Keller, thank
women's
you for the
suffrage.
$5.
Lots
And
of
just like homosexuality,
all
if
human.
Listening to Jordan Peterson is like watching a French movie with no subtitles. I kind of understand a few things, but I'm mostly lost. For the most part, it's not as confusing as he tries to make it seem. Once you've listened to Jordan Peterson over a while, you can understand the patterns that he likes to go into. But in that case, like, he actually just agreed with the statement there. He's like, yeah, so you're saying that a lot of these things from slavery onward, these are concepts that human beings came up with. Yes. Same thing with God, right? Okay. Define the.
Human societies were slave owning. So you
Yes.
can't blame that on the Bible.
if humanity decided.
Oh, wait, address that first.
What, about
All
slavery?
human societies were slavers. So you can't blame that on the.
Okay, so here's a couple that were not. There are indigenous bands in Canada that did not practice slavery. There are indigenous tribes of Native Americans in America that did not practice slavery. They had their own forms of religions. They often spoke of a universal God, a creator or the creator. They had other figures such as tricksters represented by ravens and crows, etc. There's lots to different mythologies of different indigenous tribes and bands that did not directly involve themselves with slavery. So no, there's not such a thing as that every single human civilization ever in the totality of humanity has practiced slavery, and then the only good one that actually came along and stopped that shit was white Protestants. White Protestants were the ones who realized this is bad, and eventually, after hundreds and hundreds of years, they effectively stopped doing it as much, but kind of converted parts of it into the prison industrial complex. So that's why you're wrong. Just fundamentally at its principles here.
Bible.
Well, you can say it bolstered it.
Well, not if you look at the broad sweep of history, because it was the Protestant Christians.
Well, also, you know what's wild about this is that, like, I'd heard for a long time, usually from like white supremacist circles, you know those arguments you'll always see pop up where it's like Steven Pinker's pushing them right now, that African nations were involved in the slave trade. Something that no one wants to tell you because it probably won't give you as much white guilt when you hear that. And, you know, obviously the response would be like, well, yeah, involved to sell these slaves to whom? And I guess the second part about that would be you always see the defense that's other nations did slavery. And so, what do you think about that? Like the Ottoman Empire, right, which was not a predominantly Caucasian empire. The Ottoman Empire had slaves, and they even enslaved people who had fair skin. There was white slaves. So what do you think about that one? Other civilizations have done it. Even if that was a one-to-one case where other civilizations have done slavery, they've never done it on the scale and brutality of the North Atlantic slave trade. That was a pretty unique evil in terms of human history, and how it was accelerated by capitalist incentives as well, and nation building. Both of those are really bad. But it's one of those things that led me to look into what was slavery like under the Ottoman Empire. And of course, yes, I'm not here to say slavery is good. There's a good version of slavery. But it was dramatically different than the North Atlantic slave trade, in that there was a lot of other things, such as people, for example, were able to get out of slavery if they had, been after a certain point deemed to have been, worthy of their position. There was not an inherited slavery aspect where children who were born onto a plantation were going to be future slaves by definition in the way they were in the North Atlantic slave trade. There was not chattel slavery in the form of, we're talking hundreds if not thousands of humans crammed into incredibly tight small quarters, strapped and shackled as they're transported over vast amounts of water and territory until they arrive at their destination, and sometimes 40 to 50% of all of them had died along that journey. Like there's a reason why there's no benefit to downplaying the severity or horrors of the North Atlantic slave trade, unless of course you're a white supremacist who's trying to, like, I don't know, parse out the blame, right? Like, what benefit does it have to someone if you're like, did you know that there are African nations, and there was African leaders, in fact, who were involved in the North Atlantic slave trade and who actually sold black men to slavers? And it's like, all right, that is a matter of historical fact. I don't see what recontextualizing it with that does in terms of whom they were selling these slaves to, and again, this sheer brutality of the North Atlantic slave trade. And the scale, the industrial scale to which it operated globally.
Based on their interpretation of the Bible.
It was the Protestant Christians.
Which evolves over time.
Let's pause there. You've been voted out by the majority.
All right. Well, it was great talking with you,
nice
sir.
talking to you, too.
Pretty decent.
I guess since you said morality and purpose cannot be found in science, it would just depend on like what you're referencing. If you're saying a description of your psychological preferences would be considered within science, sure. But I don't think that you have to say that it comes from science in order to be like an atheist. As an agnostic atheist, I don't know if God exists and I don't believe that God exists. And the only ones that I would really reject would be like the all-knowing, all-powerful, all-good, perfect notion of God that plenty of Christians like prescribe themselves. So I guess
how is that relevant to this claim?
You're basing a position of morality and purpose in some like notion of God that isn't the same type of notion of God that typical Christians would prescribe. Your notion of God is
what typical Christians?
Yeah, typically when I talk to Christians, they say that they believe in an all-knowing.
How about Cardinal Newman, who defined God as conscience? He's a major influence on all of Catholic social theory. How about that Christian?
Yeah.
Sure. So do you believe in the all-knowing, all-powerful, all-good notion of God?
What do you mean by believe?
Do you think it to be true?
That's the
You can't keep doing this. It's going to be like an hour and a half of Jordan Peterson responding to any single question with define, 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 ground your axioms.
Circular definition. What do you mean when you say you believe?
How is that circular?
Because you added no content to the answer by substituting the word true and believe.
I said you think it to be true.
All right. So if you believe something, you stake your life on it.
The intellectual dark web, everybody. Behold, your intellectual masters. See, for me, I have no idea what was just said. I only have a single-digit IQ. But for triple-digit IQs, that was a profound moment in human history.
What do you mean by that?
You live for it, and you die for it. That's what I mean by that.
Oh, wow.
It isn't something that you say. It isn't something that's associated with logical consistency. It's not declarative. It's not propositional. It's not a figment of your imagination. It's the presupposition of your attention and your action. And you're either fragmented, in which case you worship multiple gods, or there's some unity at the bottom of it that makes you an unstoppable force.
Okay, so you're saying that you don't believe something if you wouldn't die for it?
Not really, no.
Okay. So then,
how would you define belief? Something you say?
Well, can I explain? Like, I could believe it is the case that this pen exists, but if someone like threatened my life, right, I would lie in order to be able to save my life.
No kidding.
Right? Like, I think you would do that too. You wouldn't lie to save your life?
Don't be so sure.
You wouldn't lie to save your life?
Don't be so sure. I would love to see this moment in human history. Someone that's like, that pen's not real. Oh, that's real, bucko. I see it right there, and I'm willing to die. You can stab me in the heart, my cold, dead heart, before I believe your nonsense.
How much do you know about me? I didn't lie to save my career. I didn't lie to save my...
None of that was a personal attack, by the way. Like, he's getting extremely defensive right now of a very, I would say, common sense statement that anyone would agree with. If you're sitting there and you're like, yes, I think that pen is real, that's just observably true, right? But if someone put a gun to my face and was like, you say that pen's not real, sure, whatever you want. That I see no pen. There is no pen. Yeah, that pen was never there. I've never known a pen in my life. Yes. Okay, the gun's not pointed at my head. That was scary. Woof, that guy almost killed me because a pen is a thing. Wow, I can't believe that happened. What do you know about my career? What do you know about the things I've said or done? How dare you? That's just a very, very reasonable statement, I think.
My clinical practice.
Would you lie to like save your children, your mom, your dad?
I don't think lying would save them.
Can there ever be a circumstance logically that lying could save someone?
Yeah, and if you're steeped in sin, you're likely to live in circumstances.
Do you not realize what he's saying? If you were in a situation where there was a terrible person who was threatening the lives of your family and wanted you to lie to save their lives, you wouldn't do that? Oh, we'll see. We'll see what happens when you're put in that scenario. No, I'm just saying right now, there's no such thing as a lie that could be beneficial towards you and your family members. Right? All they wanted you to, like, what they're asking of you is not really much of an ask outside of you need to lie at this moment in history, but then they won't do a terrible thing. I'm sure you can understand the benefit to lying at that moment in history about whether or not a pen is real could benefit your family by having them not get shot.
Like that.
I'll give you an example. If you're like in like Nazi Germany, and it is the case that there's like Jewish people in your attic and you're trying to protect them,
example.
would you lie to like the Nazis?
I would have done everything I bloody well could so I wouldn't be in that situation to begin
lie?
with. It's a hypothetical, and it's not.
You won't answer that. This is not even a really deep gotcha question. It's a very basic principle morality that people have asked many times. If you're a bad person, yeah, maybe you would have sacrificed other people in order to enjoy safety for one more day. Would you be a courageous person? Who knows what any of us would do at a moment of time? It's a very difficult question to ask. Would it put your own family in jeopardy? Would it put your life in jeopardy? Like, holy hell. But then to be like, okay, but then in this situation, do you not see that there would be a material benefit to lying? It's like, oh, I won't answer that. Oh, no.
Can't answer hypotheticals?
No, I can't answer a hypothetical like
What?
that because
Did
it's
you eat
far.
today?
Look,
Did you
don't
eat today?
play games.
I'm not playing a game. I'm just
Yes,
asking if you
you
ate
are.
it.
If you present me with an intractable moral choice that's stripped of context and you back me into a corner, you're playing game. I just told you
Hypothetical.
I would do everything that I could to make sure that I'm never in that situation. By the time you go,
But that's not the question. If someone's like, here's a really terrible thing to think about, but here's a hypothetical, what would you do in this scenario? I would never be in that scenario. All right, but that doesn't answer this at all. I mean, sure. I too would like to not be in that scenario. That's the whole purpose of asking someone this, because it is, again, a horrifying situation which one would have to contend with and perhaps pull into question their own morality. Veronica, Lance, I didn't write down the email of the show last time you gave it to me live. Can you please repeat it? Serfspodcast at gmail.com. Or you can go to weareserfs.com.
You've made so many mistakes that there's nothing you can do that isn't a sin.
Being born in Nazi Germany and trying to protect people that you care about, like there could be a Jewish friend that you have and you want to protect them.
I think you should
have
just
them in
give
your
up on
attic.
that line of questioning.
Give up on.
Well, I think the answer is pretty clear. He would not. Jordan Peterson would not. Well, maybe I wouldn't, but bloody hell, that'll never happen because I'll never be in that scenario. That'll never happen to me.
Like trying to clarify your position? Because you
I
don't
did
like, are you like
clarify.
uncomfortable with me asking this question? It's just a basic hypothetical. Like I could ask you.
It's just a basic
Yeah, yeah.
hypothetical
Like,
where you
like if
put Jews' lives at stake in Nazi Germany. That's just a basic hypothetical.
obviously.
Are you trying to identity politics your way out of this? He could reframe it for you. If that particular one circumstance is just beyond the pale, the idea of saving a Jewish life because the Nazis are searching for them in your home, what would you do? How dare you? How dare you even ask?
You would lie in that scenario to save their life, but you're like not trying to answer this question for some reason.
I just told you why.
Are you anti-fascist? Like so you're
Why
anti-fascist?
are you asking that?
I was just asking, just clarifying. But like, okay, again, you're not answering this hypothetical because you know it shows that you clearly would lie to save
I'm
someone's life.
answering it in
Obviously,
a
that's
manner
not
you
what truth
don't
is.
find acceptable.
Obviously, because I care about truth.
I wouldn't be in that scenario.
Obviously, right? Logically, because that's
No.
already happened. Like that's in the past. You don't have a time travel device. We're bringing this logical hypothetical up to show you that in some circumstances that do happen within the real world, you would lie to save people's lives. So your definition of truth isn't actually how we're typically using it. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to muddy the waters when I ask you, like, do you believe this? Do you think this to be true? So you don't actually have to answer the questions. And plenty of Christians don't like that because they clearly see that you don't really like want to be associated with
I can
Christianity. with that
imagine
respect.
that I was in a situation where the best I could do as a consequence of my previous mistakes was to tell the least amount of lie I could manage. But that would likely indicate that I had made all sorts of catastrophic errors on my way there.
So you would lie to...
I like how his morality comes down to Pinocchio, basically. I would never lie for any reason.
save someone's life. So again, you do believe it to be true in that circumstance, even though you like lied in that scenario. So
not
clearly
without
that's not what
the
you see to be true.
context that I put it in.
You were not willing to
I
die for it.
said-
You were not willing to let other people die for it. So that's not what you see to be true then, seemingly.
You're doing exactly what I said you were doing at the beginning of the conversation. You're generating an impossible, restricted, hypothetical with no precursors to back me into a
How is
corner.
it possible? Is there something contradictory about it? Nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you too.
That was the best one yet. Everyone's saying that's a big
My
famous
next claim
YouTuber.
is
He's
that
good at what he does.
everybody worships something.
Jay, thank you for the $5. That implies that JP wouldn't have the courage or moral fortitude to shelter and protect people in need. Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons why he finds that personal question to be just egregious. Like, he's more offended by the question than he is at the entire concept of, like, well, do you think it is good or bad for you to protect someone, knowing that it could put your own life at risk, and knowing that if you were asked this question, yes, you have to lie. You have to lie to a Nazi fucking guard, but if you lie to a Nazi guard, that'll save the lives of a Jewish person who's hiding in your home. Would you do that?
Including atheists, even though they might not know it.
Hi.
Good work.
This one's actually his first, I'd say, slightly trickier question, because in this one, like, there is an argument to be made that, like, yes, everyone probably, whether or not they're aware of it, worships something.
Thank you.
Hi there.
I'm Zena. So I want to start off with like defining terms.
Yep.
How do you define worship?
Prioritize.
Prioritize. So almost like having a preference over something rather than the
It's a
other.
hierarchy of preferences.
Yeah.
And you use it to direct your attention.
Right.
So whatever you're attending to, you're worshiping.
Right. So I've kind of become a little bit familiar with your idea of like this value-laden hierarchy.
Yeah.
Right. And you
Yeah,
kind of
that's
posit
not
that
what
at
I
the
would ever
bottom of
define
this hierarchy,
worship
or
as, but sure.
You call it top or bottom, I
Yeah,
suppose.
right.
At the bottom of this hierarchy, this foundational priority in your life is going to be considered God.
That's
is that
right.
correct?
Yes.
Right. I'm trying to imagine a situation in which could there be that someone has a priority at their foundation that is different from someone else's?
Oh, definitely.
Right. So we can have different conceptions of God.
That's why we fight.
Right. So
That's why we
essentially,
fight.
there's not one God,
That's
but
the
there are
only
multiple
reason
gods, and these
for
gods
war.
exist in some realm of truth. It's true that this person has one God and it exists.
Yeah, probably better to think about it as multiple values, but that there's a hierarchy of values with something at the bottom.
Right. But at the
Or
bottom is
top.
God, and there
That's
are
a definition, yeah.
Yeah. So at the bottom is God, and
Yeah.
there can be multiple people with different conceptions of God, and they're each valid in being called God. So there are multiple gods that exist.
It depends on what you mean by valid. So far, so good, but it depends on what you mean by valid, because I would say that some foundational conceptions don't play out when they're implemented. So if you put the wrong thing at the foundation, you end up in hell, for example. That's what happens in totalitarian states.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're saying
So they're not all equal. Like, all foundational principles are not equal, even though
Right.
they might be equally foundational, right?
So what makes one kind of foundational tenet like better than another one?
That's an excellent question. Iterability. Imagine that you play a game with someone and you're a kid.
Iterations?
It's fun. So then you play again and again and again.
So
Well, then
repetition.
it's playability across multiple iterations. So then you have a friend, and a friend is better than having a game, right? So that's one. Breadth of application is another. So if it's just for me now, it's not as good as something that would be benefit to both of us across time.
Right. So we're explaining like characteristics that can be applied to like these types of like foundational values. But why is it that this iterability makes it better? And what does better mean?
Well, one hallmark of better is likely to be selected voluntarily.
Right.
So it's invitational.
Another descriptive kind of quality. So we're talking about characteristics that in some type of system with a goal, an output being like, we could maybe say happiness, right? Or some type of
harmony.
Harmony, right?
Yeah, that's better. Not happiness precisely, because it's too short term.
Exactly. So as someone who is an atheist, right, I can explain that within a system, there are things that we can see as better or worse to meet this goal or meet this output. But what we're interested in, though, is what could make these things, regardless of any system, right?
Well, imagine that you set up a system and you implement it, and it produces the opposite results to which you intend. Oh yeah, that's not a good system.
Exactly.
Right, so the foundational principles are lacking because when you implement them, the game degenerates instead of moving towards the aim.
Right,
Okay,
so we're talking about
okay.
within a system. That when we talk about something being moral, right, just absolutely moral, it means that without a system, right, this thing is simply moral with no reason. Like, stance independent, this thing is good. So I'm trying to figure out if such thing can exist. And if so, do you believe that these things are moral in of themselves, like self-evidently moral, or are they moral in accordance with the system?
I can't define them any more accurately than I already did, really.
Okay. In regards to morality, when we talk about the divine, when we talk about God and religion, these moral tenets and religion, right, and God exists as good because it is God, right? So it's self-evident, right? Without any kind of goal or output, this thing is good. So I want to figure out how...
There's an element of that that's true. So for example, in the story of Job, Job is unfairly tortured in consequence of a bet between God and Satan.
You got to cut him off as soon as he starts
Job
his
is
biblical
emblematic of
stories.
someone who's being hurt for no apparent reason. Okay, so Job's response to that is that he refuses to lose faith in himself, and he refuses to lose faith in the ultimate goodness of being. Okay, and those are axiomatic decisions. They're not exactly evidence dependent because he is suffering. There's an arbitrariness in that that's reminiscent of what you claim.
So I'm essentially trying to figure out, do you believe that something can be good, like stance independently, something that can be good?
I don't know what you mean by stance independent.
Okay, so
you mean independent of people?
Independent of people, we can use that, or more so, I want to be more specific. Something that can be good, right, regardless of any end goal. It's just good.
No, I think good is tied up with goal.
Goal, okay, I completely agree. So in a sense, this is why...
That's why the religious goal in Christianity is the establishment of the kingdom of heaven on earth. It's goal dependent.
Okay, right.
So it's in reference to a goal.
So,
or the goal would be the imitation of Christ.
Someone's goal, right, can be something that doesn't encompass being in congruence with God or being with God.
No, the thing that they want to be in congruence...
Oh, right, okay, it is God.
That's right. That's right. That's good. That's great. The thing they want to be in congruence with is fundamentally equivalent to their God.
So what makes someone a Christian and what makes someone not a Christian? What makes like that's what I'm trying to figure out, because
that's a good question.
Yes.
Yeah, well, probably the deepest answer to that is willingness to shoulder your cross voluntarily and trudge uphill regardless of circumstances.
Okay, so someone can have a God, because in your definition, your first preference, that is God, right? So someone can believe in God, right, and not be a Christian, right?
Yeah, well, there's a statement that Christ makes in the Gospels. He says, not everyone who says, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven.
So not that they're even saying that they believe in God, but they just...
No, but that's why I'm saying this to you, is that Christ himself points out that there's a difference between people who say they believe and people who act it out. And the fundamental issue is the action rather than the stated belief.
But he also says that, to be saved, right, you must believe God has died for your sins, or that God has resurrected in some way. So it's like, I don't necessarily think that we can take from the Bible and say that, like, acting in accordance with God necessarily means, or acting in accordance with, the principles of God, like, for example, sacrifice, like you talk about, means that you are Christian. I don't see how you can get that from that interpretation and then, kind of justify it as the truth.
I don't think that the fact that you sacrifice is sufficient to make you Christian.
So can we repeat once again what you believe makes someone Christian?
There's many things, but one of the most fundamental is that you believe that the cosmos itself is founded on the principle of voluntary self-sacrifice. Best founded. Let me offer you a
I've never heard a
contrary
Christian
example.
say that.
So I could assume that power rules. And so that my assumption would be, if I can make you do it, I win. Right.
Like, can you imagine going up to a Christian and being like, so what made you a Christian? Oh, the same thing as most Christians, just like that cosmic belief and the principle of self-sacrifice in order to move the great wheel. It's like, what?
And I can found a whole society on that, and that happens a lot, by the way. And that's also how societies tend to degenerate. And so that would be a society that was founded on the principle that you get to sacrifice and I don't have to. Right. Now, the contrary.
So you're saying selfishness, essentially. Selfishness is not Christian, which is wild considering you wouldn't even answer the question in that last person when they're asking, would you lie to a Nazi guard in order to protect a Jewish person in your home? I won't answer that. Never lie. I'll never be in that scenario.
To that would be something like,
well, that might require self-sacrifice.
You give up voluntarily and with courage all the things you need to situate yourself properly in relationship to the future and other people. Right. So then there's a harmony. That's why I talked about harmony earlier.
So you navigate your life, right, in accordance kind of to this principle of self-sacrifice. Can I say it in that way?
Yes, you can definitely say it that way. That's exactly right. And navigate is the right term.
So someone does not have to have any awareness of Christ, of the story of Jesus, but let's say 60% of their actions, right, or more, whatever kind of metric you want to use, are in line with this self-sacrificial.
So the Christian thinkers of the Middle Ages dealt exactly with that problem when they were talking about the pre-Christian philosophers, for example. And they noted the similarity, let's say, between pre-Christian Greek thought and later Christian thought, and presumed that there were moral actors outside the Christian domain.
Right. So is that person Christian, though? Is that person Christian?
Well, to some degree, again, that's a matter of definition, because they wouldn't be proclaiming Christian propositions, but they're acting out the pattern. Right. So so you imagine that full Christianity would involve a dozen things. And you can imagine someone who knows nothing of Christianity, say, acting out 8 of them.
Right.
So then they'd be 8/12 Christian or something like that.
Christian. Well, but to be like a full Christian, how can someone say I am Christian? Like I am Christian, not 8/12, but Christian.
Well, I hesitate to do that personally because I think it's the kind of goal that you be very careful about proclaiming. The technical.
But belief is not necessarily, to be mostly Christian, belief is not necessary. 8/12s or, right?
Well, it depends on what you mean by belief. See, because I would say that acting out the pattern is the deepest form of belief. Now, you could add to that what you say. So, maybe in the optimal situation, how you act and what you imagine and what you say, they're the same. Right? But you can imagine a hypocrite who says all sorts of wonderful things and does nothing, and you could imagine another person who acts in a very positive manner but proclaims nothing.
So what I'm kind of seeing is like a descriptive, a really comprehensive but descriptive analysis of human action, human thought, and by which we can characterize people and put people in boxes, but I don't see...
Why in boxes?
Like, when I say in boxes, I mean like I can categorize you based on your actions, not based on necessarily what you say, but based on your actions that you are more so or less so Christian, right? Things like that, right? So we can categorize people as Christian.
Well, I would say more or less voluntarily self-sacrificing.
But that's also what we came to, though, is that someone can be like 60% or 70% Christian based on simply just acting in that way.
Yeah, Richard Dawkins is like that.
I watched that debate.
Let's pause there. We've been voted out by the majority.
Very good.
Thank you so much.
Really, very thoughtful.
Hey, Dr. Peterson.
How you doing?
Danny, nice to meet you.
What's your name?
Danny.
Danny.
You're saying atheists worship things or people or places, whatever. Can you be very clear about your definition of worship again?
Attend to, prioritize, and sacrifice for.
Okay, that's it. That's your...
changed a bit since last time, but sure. It seems to be whatever he wants it to be.
Understanding of worship.
Well, I could flesh it out, but that'll do for the time we have.
Okay. Do Catholics attend to Mary?
Well, yes.
Okay. So do they fit that description of worship?
Yes.
So you would say Catholics and other people that revere Mary, like the Eastern Orthodox tradition, worship Mary.
Well, they might not put her in the highest
But
place.
you would put it that way.
No.
You just said it. Now you're taking it back.
There's still a hierarchy.
Okay, there's a hierarchy, but within the
there's something at the top.
All right, you can worship things
Mary
below.
is quite a ways up the hierarchy, but not at the top.
Let's go over your definition of worship again. What's your definition of worship?
Attend to.
Attend to. Do
prioritize.
Do Catholics
sacrifice for?
Do Catholics attend to? Do they prioritize Mary over all other human beings?
No, I didn't say overall, did I? I didn't
Well,
add that to my
you
definition.
you understand-
I said there was a hierarchy as well.
You attend a
So you can
Catholic-
attend to something trivially, or you can attend to it deeply.
Okay, now
there's
you're
a-
adding stuff to the definition, but your original
I
definition.
added the hierarchy part at the beginning.
Are you
just
familiar?
didn't understand it.
Are you familiar with the Immaculate Conception?
Didn't understand it.
Why is that relevant?
Because you go to a Catholic church, don't you? Or you've attended recently. You're interested in Catholicism, aren't you?
Sure,
All right. Are you familiar with their doctrines?
somewhat.
Okay, you're
Their
familiar.
doctrines are
how
very
do they
deep.
regard Mary?
Why are you asking me that?
Because you're a Christian.
You say that. I haven't claimed that.
Oh, what is this? Is this Christians versus atheists?
I don't know.
You don't know where you are right now.
Don't be a smartass.
No, be a smartass. This motherfucker has not been good faith this entire time. I definitely need more smartassery. Please ramp it up. I never said that. I love that. Sorry, was this not the 25 atheists debate a Christian? Was that not the name of the entire Jubilee? Did you not phrase all these questions that we're answering?
Either you're a
'Cause I
Christian
won't
or you're
talk
not.
to you if you're a smartass.
Either you're
Oh.
a Christian or you're not. Which one is it?
I could be either of them, but I don't have to tell
could be-
you.
You don't have to tell me. I was under the impression I
private.
was invited to talk to a Christian. Am I not talking to a Christian?
No, you were invited to.
I think everyone should look at the title of the YouTube channel. You're probably in the wrong YouTube video.
You're really quite something. You.
To be clear, and I was told this, apparently the video used to be 25 atheists versus a Christian, but they've retitled it to 25 atheists versus Jordan Peterson. I don't know if that was to get the more clicks in the algorithm kind of thing, or simply because Jordan told him afterwards, like, well, maybe change the title. One of those kids kind of got the better of me. I don't know what happened there.
Ty, but you're really quite nothing, right? You're not a Christian.
Okay, I'm done with him.
Awesome. Oh, so they do have the power to just be like, no, away with this one. I no longer want to speak to them. They displease me. Yes. Yeah, not really marching with that cross like he said he was earlier.
Hi there.
Hi, nice
What's
to meet
your
you.
name?
Gerard.
Hello, Gerard.
Nice to meet you, sir. So you've said that worship is when you prioritize and sacrifice for something, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
There's a hierarchy.
Yeah.
Sure. So I prioritize and sacrifice for my wife more than I would prioritize and sacrifice for a random person on the street, right?
Probably, yeah.
Presumably. Do I worship
I don't know.
my
I've
wife?
seen some pretty bad marriages.
Assuming a good marriage, are you saying I worship my wife?
I'm trying to define worship.
Well, that's what I'm asking. So prioritize and sacrifice.
Trying to
I do
The
define
that.
higher it
everything.
is in the hierarchy, the more what you're doing is akin to worship. But even in your trivial acts of attention, you're prioritizing and partaking in worship, even if you don't know it.
So I am
And it's
prioritizing.
partly, well, with regard to your wife, say. So why do you value your wife? You do value your
Yes,
wife.
I love
okay.
her. So I
Right,
prioritize and I
okay.
sacrifice for her.
Right. So that's within the confines of love, let's say.
Sure.
What else does it serve?
What else does what serve?
Your love and your marriage?
I mean, I am married to my wife because I love her. That's
Yeah.
also why
I
I
guess the
prioritize and
implication is
sacrifice
God.
for her. I certainly wouldn't think I worship her, and I don't think anyone else would make that.
I'm
Are you
trying to
making
make
that
a
claim?
definition.
You should.
Okay.
Yeah, that there's a hierarchy of attentional priority, and as you move up it or down it, depending on whether you think about it as a pinnacle or a foundation, you move more towards worship. Right,
Okay.
so even the small things, I'll give you an example. Imagine you go on a date. Well, imagine that your aim is a long-term relationship like a marriage. Okay, now imagine that your aim is short-term sexual gratification. Your pattern of attention is going to vary during the date, depend on your ultimate end.
Of
That's
course.
the hierarchy. The way that
That's the
you attend to your wife is dependent on your
That's the
ultimate
hierarchy of
aims,
worship?
even if you don't know it.
So at what point is it worship? Because it sounds like you're saying
It's
worship
shame.
is almost a spectrum,
It's
right?
shame,
Or
sorry.
It's not a binary. It's not a.
It's kind of
quantum.
like, that's a good
So
question.
when
It's
is
like
when is it worship as opposed to just I love my wife?
the closer you get to the top or the bottom, the more it's more like
How close
worship.
to the top? Because I don't think I worship anything. And if you're saying I have to hit a certain threshold for it to be worship, it is possible I don't worship anything then, right?
It's not possible that you don't worship anything.
What do I worship?
Because you wouldn't attend. Well, love.
So you think I
apparently.
worship love?
Do you attend in consequence of love?
I
See,
do.
I'm trying to define something. What
Right.
do you mean worship? I told you what I meant. What do you mean?
So I mean, something you worship is something that you have a reverential view for in a manner in which you believe it to be above and beyond normal things you like. Like you
So do you
presumably
have
worship
that
God.
attitude towards your wife?
I have that
Do you
attitude.
privilege her compared to other women?
Of course, I privilege her compared to
Okay.
other women, but I don't worship her. Nor
Well-
does she worship me.
By the definition you just offered, yes, you do. Because you just offered a definition that involved prioritization and elevation.
Well, and thinking that she is
Turns out you do worship your wife. Checkmate. I'm just gonna see if there's any more interesting ones. I think there's only 2 other people left who get a chance.
So I mean, something you worship is something that you have a reverential view for in a manner in which you believe it.
Atheists accept Christian morality, but deny the religion's foundational stories.
That one's, God, come on. Students, that one's really, really easy, right? That atheists accept Christian morality. Come on. I mean, don't spend 10 minutes with him being like, all right, can we start with definitions? Because we really need to define things. Can you define, and then define definition? And then after you define definition, define the word the, and then define by, and then define morality, and then define God, and then talk about God, and then maybe we can have a conversation. We'll get to that point.
Hi there.
It's very nice to meet you.
What's your name?
I'm Ian.
Hi, Ian.
Yes. So God says that you can own people as property. He says that you can beat them with a rod too.
Okay, there we go.
He commands genocide in Deuteronomy, in Numbers, and in Samuel. I mean, they have a goddamn baby barbecue in Numbers. Like, is all of this in line with Christian ethics?
No.
God doesn't fit within Christian ethics.
I just love how fucking pissed off he wasn't hearing that. No. It's in there as bad things you shouldn't do.
Well, the biblical library is a continuing story, and everything written in it has to be contextualized by the entire text. There's 65,000 hyperlinks in the biblical text. You can take pieces of it out of context and criticize them, and that's what you're doing. But that
he kept bringing up all these other biblical, like, fables, stories, and saying that they demonstrate or denote morality. Job being one of them, by the way. So when he lost everything and was still asked to praise God, and if only he had praised God, maybe he wouldn't have suffered as much. And then weird, but yeah, okay. Why don't you take a very popular one? The Noah's Ark, the common story, everyone knows it. Noah receives a message from God that soon God will be doing complete genocide of all land animals, not sea animals. They'll be fine under the water, but all land animals, including human beings. Everyone is about to get drowned to death, and that's just what God's going to do. But you have an opportunity now, Noah. You can go forth and you can basically get 2 of every single species of the earth, put them onto a giant ark, and then you can survive this. And then at the end of it all, after my genocide is complete and I've wiped off all fucking life on the surface of the earth, hopefully you'll have all of the building blocks you need to recreate all of humanity from scratch and create some bizarre, twisted incest future in which every single creature is derived from one of 2 parents, meaning that there's just going to have to be a fuck ton of incest down the road in order to propagate each one of the species all over again. Now, keeping in mind, obviously, it's absurd because of the fact that, I think there's 600,000 kinds of beetles alone, that the whole thing is kind of just insane. But yeah, if you were to take it literally, what's the morality of this message? What does this thing teach us? That, God can be spiteful, and that at any given time, God can decide, hey, you know what, I'm drowning life, all of it, except for underwater life. The fish, they were fine. In fact, life got better for them. There was more ocean to hang out in. But otherwise, yeah, I don't know, even though it's one of the most popular stories from the Bible, if that necessarily teaches us something that I think would be of a benefit to humanity, right? That any given day, God will Thanos all of the land mammals and creatures and all the birds and insects and viruses, everything will just get drowned out by a massive flood. And then if you get the signal beforehand, the God signal, then you go forth and build the incest ark.
That's a mistake. I think it's an analytic mistake because you're putting the cart before the horse.
I really don't think so. I think that if we say that something is Christian ethics, then I think that all of the books essential to Christianity would fit with it, especially if it's the main character. When we're talking about
how do you deal with
God,
the morality of war?
So
how do you think you should deal with the morality of war?
Sure. Because I feel like the morality, I feel like Christian ethics, this is kind of I guess I just think it's like kind of an absurdity to say that God doesn't fit within Christian ethics, but sure, well, we can go on my ethics. That's totally fine.
I don't know what you mean by an absurdity. What game are you playing with
Well,
that
I just think
question?
that it's an absurdity to say that the Christian God doesn't fit within Christian ethics.
What witchcraft
that, like, the
is
Christian
this?
God isn't
Are you
Christian
conjuring a
ethics.
spell?
The specific statements that you made don't take the context of the stories into account, and so that your analytical approach is faulty.
Sure.
Don't put words in my mouth.
He's just the biggest dick of a professor. I'm glad we all got it. Like, you know how he's selling his own university now, the unaccredited university where you can spend tens of thousands of dollars and never get a job from it? You know exactly what he'd be like as a teacher. You sit across from him. I have a question. How dare you disgust me?
Sure, then let's go through
Thank
the
you.
example. Yeah, so, and I apologize. So let's go through the example. So in 1 Samuel 15:3, God says, go and slaughter the Amalekites, slaughter the men, the women, the children, the infants. What's the justification for that? Is that in line
That's a
with
good
Christian
question.
ethics?
That's a good question. I don't really know what to do with the terrible, blood-soaked, saturated history of the human past.
This is the Bible. Keep in mind, the question is, atheists accept Christian morality, but deny its foundational stories.
I don't know. And I don't think anybody knows. I mean, what you try to do in your own life, as far as I can tell, is to conduct yourself in a manner that makes such things much more unlikely.
I totally agree.
We're all...
I would just respond to that. I was not quoting a historical text on events that took place. I was quoting Yahweh from the Bible, from Numbers, stating that you should, like, this is a command to a group of people to go slaughter another group of people by God in the Bible, where it says that you should not only go there and slaughter them, but you should slaughter the women, the children, and their horses. That seems extreme and fucked. So if I was to derive my morality, what higher morality is there than God, right? And if God itself is saying, go do this horrifying thing, can I not then disagree with the morality of the Bible?
Saddled with the problem of the catastrophes that got us here, aren't we?
Yeah, but this one was commanded by God. That's the problem.
Yeah,
That's
well,
what differentiates it from anything
Correct.
else, is that this one, it's God
Do you
saying,
think that
go
there's
and
ever
do this
such a thing-
atrocity.
Do you think that there's ever such a thing as a righteous war?
I'm skeptical. I'm not sure. It would probably be such.
But you could answer this with, okay, so are you implying that this is okay? Because we're really getting down to morality, and obviously this is going to be subjective. It's just two randos on the internet having a conversation in front of a lot of other people. And so ultimately, do you think that's okay to go forth, slaughter not just combatants and soldiers, but all the civilians, their children, and their animals? I think you'd probably say no, I hope, right? Like you'd be like, those are war crimes. Now in the modern age, we've kind of defined those acts, collective punishment, stuff like that. You know, basically what Israel does all the time. Those are war crimes. We shouldn't do them.
Situational.
Well, right, fair
Yeah,
enough.
but
I
this
mean,
one
people,
certainly wasn't a just war. The context for the Amalekite slaughter is that 400 years earlier, they fought one battle, which they lost, and God says, that's it, I'm going to wipe them off the face of the goddamn earth. And then 400 years later, he commands the Israelites to genocide their great-great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren. That's not a just war at all. And also, a genocide is not a war.
Well, a genocide can be a war, but...
Absolutely not.
Hell yeah. Good job. Yeah.
Genociding of the Amalekites, the men, the women, and the infants, that's not a war. The infants aren't combatants.
Look, I already said that it's very difficult to look at the blood-soaked past and to know exactly what to do about it.
These are instructions by God in the Bible. He still hasn't gotten to that point yet.
The answer I gave to the gentleman who is sitting here before you is that it's necessary to read a text like the Bible at all of its levels of analysis simultaneously. And there's a directional morality that emerges across time that has its roots in the Old Testament, for example, with its restrictions against murder specifically, that makes itself manifest in the Christian texts as the insistence on voluntary self-sacrifice as the foundational belief. That's a profoundly anti-violence ethos.
Do you have the belief in your theology?
Well, what do you think of that? Wait a second. No, redress
So,
what I just
yeah.
said.
So I'm about to address it, but I'm
Okay.
addressing it with a question. Do you think that God is by his very essence perfect?
You'll have to provide more.
Sure, just like maximally great in all like the
think
great
it's a
making
definition.
qualities.
Sure.
Yeah,
By
like
definition.
flawless. Yeah. So
Okay, so
does a
wait a
flawless
sec,
thing
wait a sec.
change? Does a flawless thing reveal like more and better information over time, or would a flawless thing say, here's what's good, here is the absolute good thing to do at all circumstances in time?
Well, we know some of that.
Wait,
Tell
so
the
does-
truth. That's one.
That's totally fine, but
No,
presumably...
no. You don't get to skate over
because
that.
this is a straw
That's
man.
totally
This is
fine.
a straw man of my position. It's a straw man of the argument.
And also, what part of the Bible is just like the core tenet of everything? Tell the truth. So saith Yahweh. Only the truth.
So
In what
the
way?
argument
No,
is
wait,
that God...
wait a sec. You
Well, I'm already
said
waiting a sec.
find one maxim that's transcendent across situations.
I didn't
and
say any
just
of
did.
those words. I'm not sure what
Okay,
conversation
rephrase.
you're a part of.
Don't be a smartass.
I'm sorry.
Seriously, I mean it. We're gonna have a
I would not be able to take this man seriously at all. The second he gets mad over nothing, I'd be like, are you serious? Aren't you worth like, I don't know, $500 million? Aren't you leaving this to go to one of your 12 mansions? Like, buddy, you're fine. I'm a college student. I'm just here for the show. Like, come on. How dare you? No smartassery.
serious conversation. Conduct yourself properly.
Okay.
Okay. Rephrase your question so that, because I must
Sure.
have missed it. I
So-
tried to answer it.
So in my mind, I guess by my lights, a perfect being doesn't change. A perfect being, if they're maximally good, maximally moral,
Does our understanding of the perfect being change?
our understanding might, but
Okay, how
presumably
do we
what the perfect being is revealing.
Well, I agree. How do we distinguish between that, though, at the human level?
How do
So,
we distinguish between whether...
between our transforming understanding of perfection and perfection itself?
Between our
we can only,
unders-
yeah, well, we can only
Presumably
see
a
through our
perfect
own
being-
lenses.
Presumably a perfect being would be revealing all of these aspects all the time, especially if God's outside of time. I don't know how a God who's outside of time
does
is
something-
revealing different things at different times. That just seems like incoherent to me.
Imagine something that's perfect.
Sure.
And complete.
Sure.
Okay, and it's trying to communicate
Ice cream
with
cake.
creatures who are anything but that.
Sure.
Well, they're going to get it wrong.
Me.
Sure.
Okay, now wait a sec. Do you blame that on the interpreters or the phenomena itself?
So in
Like,
this
for
case-
example, are you
well, yeah, I
perfect in
blame this-
attending?
Okay, so that's kind of the crux there. So the problem wasn't God calling for people to do genocide. The problem was how the messengers have conveyed the message. So the people who basically wrote each different chapter of the Bible, each one of the authors, they misinterpreted what God meant, and so that's their yeah. It's an unreliable narrator.
To your conscience?
Hold on. At the point in time when God is literally the one who created us, he could have created us in a way where we would always be receptive to these principles, where we don't have to go across like a learning curve where, maybe we'll understand
maintain
like
free will.
thousands of years into the future, maybe we'll do it. Oh, also,
Where
if you
free
believe
will
in an
comes
all-knowing
in,
God, then
bucko.
free will is impossible because
Wait
if
a sec. Let's
well,
not go
wait,
to
because
that
you,
yet.
you threw
Wait.
free will into the mix.
Well, that was
I-
the answer to your question.
Yeah, and
you
I'm
said,
saying
why
that that's
wouldn't God?
incoherent.
Well,
It's
1,000
contradictory.
years of deep thinking philosophers would disagree with you, but have
and
it your
a
way.
1,000 years of, or at least like the last 50 years of philosophers would disagree with you. These analytic philosophers, people like Graham Oppie make arguments about the incompatibility of omniscience and free will, that if God created this world, if he chose this world instead of that world, then he makes it causally inevitable every single action that you were going to make. If he made a world where we were just electrons in love, then none of this would have happened. But by making us in this world, knowing exactly what's going to happen in the future, it makes all of those events inevitable, which means that they're all causally determined, which means that we have no free will if you believe in an all-good God or an all-knowing God that made everything.
Well, have it your way.
Okay, cool.
I
So
don't-
then the
I
free will
don't-
of theodicy fails.
Well,
His argument landed on the slogan for Burger King, effectively. Okay, fine, have it your way, baby.
fails for you. That doesn't mean you've disproved it. I mean,
Do you
you
want to
tried
respond
to
to
make
the argument?
Yes, you tried to make a case for a causally deterministic universe. I don't think there's any evidence for that at all.
Do you think that God could have created a different universe than the one that he created?
I have no idea.
Okay, so then there's going to be a double bind, right? So either he couldn't have done it, in which case he lacks a power, or he could have done it, in which case we don't have free will, because he chose this world instead of that world, making the events of this world instead of that world inevitable with
Okay.
his infallible knowledge.
I don't understand where you're headed.
Jordan, I think you need to smoke a joint, at which point we can start talking about parallel existences, timelines, universes.
Self-defense fails. Like all this, like under
Like
your
I said,
view,
if you want to have it
free
fail,
will.
no problem. I don't know why it's relevant to the issue we're
Do you
discussing.
acknowledge that under your view, free will doesn't exist?
No.
Oh, then do you want to respond to the argument?
You'll have to phrase it more
Sure,
clearly
okay.
so that someone like me can understand it.
Yeah, gotcha. So God already knows in advance everything that's going to happen, which means that by making this world instead of that world, everything is inevitable, which means that God's act of causing this world instead of that
Inevitable
world.
doesn't mean determined.
It's causally inevitable if God chooses this world instead of that world.
Doesn't make it determined.
Causally inevitable means determined.
No, it doesn't.
Absolutely, yes, it does.
Well, have it your
Semantics.
way.
Have it your
Okay.
way, baby.
That's not the case.
You've been voted out.
All right, I think I'm going to pause it there. Obviously, hashtag not all Christians. I know there are people who are Christians who don't believe in being religious fundamentalists or pushing their beliefs on anyone else, and they just want to enjoy worshiping something that they grew up with that brings them closer to their family and friends. That's all fine and good. I say the same thing for any religion, whether it be Buddhism, Jainism, it doesn't matter, or those who like to ironically worship being inside of a turtle's dream riding on Taco Cat, whatever your personal flavor is. But I don't think Jordan Peterson was prepared to actually respond to any actual arguments. I find any single one of the people who actually started to expose that Jordan Peterson has no fucking idea what he's talking about would get shut down extremely fast. But if you were showing him an unbelievably, and I would say an unfair amount of grace, where you sat across from him and then you're like, okay, so I just want to slowly learn from you, get step by step. I also want to preface by I enjoy your work, but I happen to be an atheist, so I have to disagree with you on this. But anyways, then yeah, sure. He as long as you let him ramble on for like 20 plus minutes about one of his favorite Bible stories, where he's like, oh well, let me tell you about Job. We'll get down to the fundamentals here. Then yeah, Jordan, he was not mad. But as soon as someone was actually disproving his actual logic, he got so angry so fast. He seems like a terrible teacher. Shinto, the one true religion. I like all the flavors. I mean, yeah, maybe you are into polytheism. You like believing in many gods. You only believe in one God. Whatever the case, or you believe in no gods, or you're just trying to figure things out, just trying to feel where are we going from here. It cannot be known, so...
Don't let this happen to you. Go to serfscoffee.com to order the only end-to-end owned indigenous coffee company that delivers blood-free, conflict-free, and cruelty-free beans right to your door. 0% of people who drink serfscoffee.com have exploded spontaneously. By ordering right now, you get 10% off plus free shipping, and it's the best way to enjoy delicious coffee while not exploding. That's serfscoffee.com, serfscoffee.com.
Thank you so much for watching, everyone. This video wouldn't be at all possible without the financial support of all the people whose names you see on the screen right now. And if you want to unlock secret bonus episodes, content that we can't post anywhere else, or get the videos early before anyone else gets to see them, please go on to patreon.com/theserfs. For as little as $1, you can help support this channel and help make more videos like this possible. Our executive producers are Anna Loves Riley, Adrian McCarthy, Bobby Lasers, Cheryl Alvarez, Comrade Junkie, Doug Caddy, Everything Important, Garrett Sandoval, Hagbard Celine, Jimmy Sombrero, Multimondi, Omni, Political Papi, Preston Kroll, Quiet 185, Richard Boehm, Riley and Anna, Roller Dragon, Cernicus, Stellar Gwyn, Sebastian Demel, Tigwig, Trav, and Words Greenwood. And also, it wouldn't be possible without all the names you see on the screen right now. Again, if you want to help produce this content, it's only made possible through the funding of our patrons. Head on down to patreon.com/theserfs. That's patreon.com/theserfs.